I want to welcome you to today's Smith in the World panel featuring experiences in government law policy and international affairs. My name is Heather DeLand, and I am the Assistant Director of Government Law Policy and International Affairs Careers at Smith's Lazarus Center for Career Development. We are delighted to welcome everyone in attendance today, and we're thrilled to be joined by students, prospective students, former Smith in the World presenters, faculty, staff, family, friends, supervisors, and colleagues. The Smith in the World Conference celebrates students' off-campus experiential learning, which could be internships, community service, or research. So during these panels, students reflect on how these experiences have impacted and enriched their academic and professional journey. This is the fourth panel of the 2026 Smith in the World Conference series, and we have two additional panels next week. Arts, Media, and Communications is on Tuesday, January 20th, and STEM is on Thursday, January 22nd. The Smith in the World series is part of the college's Spring Showcase, and you can learn more about that. Emily, thank you for putting that in the chat by just clicking that link. All right, so today's panel on government law policy and international affairs will feature four student panelists who will give short presentations about recent off-campus learning experiences. Our panelists today include Beatriz Cazho Garcia, who will share about her legal internship at the Massachusetts Trial Court in Greenfield. Shalini Setty, discussing her time as a program intern at the Women's Foreign Policy Group. Riddha Iyengar, who worked in the First People's First Stewards program at the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. And Nicole Simorangkir, who will share her experience at the Permanent Mission of Indonesia to the United Nations. So just a couple quick notes for the audience before we get started, and then I will turn it over to our brilliant panelist. First, today's session is recorded, so we just ask that audience members please keep your microphones muted. The second is that any questions that you have for our presenters can be submitted using the chat tool, and then we will field all of those questions during the Q&A after all four presentations are finished. So with that, I will hand it over to our first panelist, Beatriz.
Sounds good. Let me just present my screen. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Beatriz Cazho Garcia. I'm a current sophomore, and I'm majoring in government and neuroscience. And for my presentation today, I'm going to talk about my internship this past summer with the Massachusetts Trial Court, specifically the Court Service Center in Greenfield, Massachusetts. So here's the overview for my presentation. I will begin by providing some background on the Court Service Center, describing some of my tasks during my internship, my key takeaways, and how the internship impacted my academic and career goals. To begin, the Greenfield Court Service Center helps court users in the community, especially those from underserved populations, gain access to the court system by providing them with free legal assistance and information on resources they have at their disposal. The Greenfield Court Service Center is available to all court users who do not have lawyers, and there are no income or immigration status requirements for those who seek assistance. Some of the services that the Court Service Center provides are to help people navigate the court system by having one-on-one help with filling out forms for certain case types. We provide information about court rules, procedures, and practices, as well as court documents, written instructions, and contact information for community resources, legal assistance programs, and social service agencies. And overall, the Court Service Center aims to promote equity and access to the Massachusetts trial court system. The primary tasks and projects that I worked on at the Greenfield Court Service Center included assessing the needs of court users through intakes, explaining the resources and services available to them depending on their different case types, and assisting them with filling out court forms. I also spent some time researching different kinds of community resources and organizations that could help or apply to the circumstances of different court users requesting assistance. And lastly, I got to learn a lot about specific topics regarding the legal system and legal terminology, as well as sitting in on court hearings and shadowing attorneys. As my internship progressed, I was able to begin gaining more experience, and through that, my tasks evolved. And I was able to begin doing intakes on my own, writing my own notes for each case, and entering them into FormStack, which is the Court Service Center's database, as well as the case list, which was a spreadsheet I helped create to keep track of court users' information, like their contact information, case details, and filing status. I was also able to collaborate with Court Service Center staff to create new court materials, like a slide deck with information on how to fill out financial statements, a community legal aid intake information handout, and I was able to assist in updating a court appeals packet. Also, the attorneys that I had shadowed early on in my internship they later allowed me to fill out forms for court users like military affidavits, child care and custody affidavits, and financial statements with less supervision. And lastly, through becoming more comfortable with shadowing and networking throughout my internship, I was able to connect with an attorney working in health law and discover that this is an area of law that I'm really interested in learning more about. One of the new skills that I developed during my internship was filling out court forms and paperwork, as I mentioned before. And also having the opportunity to build up this skill and this background is really great because it helped me become more familiar with legal terminology and learn about different parts of forms, like where to put plaintiff and defendant information, where to put the case name, the division of the court, and more, which are all skills I know will be useful to me in my legal career going forward. And other skills I was able to develop were researching community resources and sharing important information with court users with compassion and empathy. Researching community resources is another skill that will be really useful to me in the future since I use research all the time in my classes. And building up the skill of speaking to court users with compassion and empathy when dealing with sensitive information is also really essential. And lastly, during my internship, I was also mainly serving as the primary Spanish-speaking support for court users. And this not only helped me realize how useful transferable skills can be, but also the importance of accessibility in the legal system. One of my most significant moments from my time at the Court Service Center was being able to help a Spanish-speaking family file a counterclaim for an eviction case where the landlord was threatening eviction after the family had alerted him that he was failing to fix leak issues in the apartment complex, making living conditions unsafe for tenants. And working with this family, they not only expressed their relief in finally being able to access legal services in Spanish, but also their frustrations with the legal system and the fact that many of the resources they had been referred to weren't in Spanish or had no Spanish-speaking people available to help with translation, making the process difficult and inaccessible. And this was really significant to me because I was not only able to help a family who had been searching for assistance for months, but it also opened my eyes to the work that we need to do in the legal field to make sure that all resources are more accessible for court users. And this interaction later inspired me to collaborate with another intern at the Court Service Center to create Spanish and Portuguese versions of handouts and intake sheets. As mentioned before, this role really helped me understand the importance of transferable skills, not only with Spanish speaking, but also with skills like communication, organization, and time management. Before working at the Court Service Center, I had had a remote internship with Avalon Apparel, a Los Angeles-based fashion company, as a social media and marketing intern. And although the role was really different from my role as a legal intern, my time management skills for meeting deadlines and organizational skills for handling multiple projects at a time were extremely helpful as a Court Service Center intern. And I was also able to use my skills and background in marketing and social media to help create visually appealing handouts, instruction booklets, and slide decks. Another takeaway I had from the internship was improving my networking and communication skills. I was able to learn how to ask insightful questions about court processes and different career paths that exist within the legal field. And becoming more comfortable with asking questions and demonstrating an interest in learning more is what ultimately led me to discover health law as well as other areas of law I hadn't considered before. And this connects to my last takeaway, which is that because there were 6 different courts located in the building where I was interning, I was able to observe all kinds of cases and learn about many different areas of law, including family law, criminal law, and housing law. And this was extremely helpful because it showed me what different kinds of cases look like in various legal sectors. And this helped me explore which areas of law interest me most. This internship also impacted my career goals because it solidified my interest in the legal field. Through my daily interactions with court users, research into free legal resources for my community, and attending court hearings, I realized that this is a career path that I really want to pursue and learn more about. And as mentioned earlier, I also learned through conversations with some of the attorneys at the Court Service Center that there are various legal paths within law that I can pursue, and one of them was health law. That was the one that piqued my interest the most because it combines my interests with science and medicine with a legal component. And as I continue my journey here at Smith, potential next steps for me include law-related coursework, internships, and experiences. And my academic studies here at Smith definitely prepared me for this internship since many of the courses I have taken here are focused on politics and law, providing me with a strong background in how to analyze and read legal documents. And these skills that I gained from my courses were extremely useful when I was asked to pull details from case files or when I was asked to read and research the Massachusetts appeals process to help create a booklet guide for court users. And lastly, the process of finding my internship with the Greenfield Court Service Center also changed the way that I approach searching for internships and jobs. I was able to actually find my internship through attending the career fair last fall. And although I came into the whole experience very nervous about networking and worried that I wouldn't be able to find anything as a first year, through asking questions and demonstrating an interest in the Massachusetts Trial Court's internship program, I was able to connect with a recruiter and I was able to get an interview. Now I'm not only more comfortable with networking and attending events like career fairs, but I'm also more comfortable with talking to recruiters, interviewing, and creating cover letters and resumes. Okay. And that's all I have. Thank you so much for listening.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear more about the Women's Foreign Policy Group.
Let me just share my screen. Okay. Can you see? Okay, awesome. Um, I had the pleasure to intern, excuse me, at the Women's Foreign Policy Group in DC last summer. Uh, So WFPG is a nonprofit membership-based organization that is based in DC. Oh wait, sorry. My name is Shalini. I am a senior. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a government and French double major, and I studied abroad in Paris last year, which honestly impacted a lot of which internships I applied to, but then also the experiences I had. Okay, going back. WFPG, when I left in August, the organization had only over 1,000 global members, including diplomats. And WFPG also has strategic partnerships with corporate, academic, and organizational supporters. So that means schools or organizations or companies can purchase joint memberships, and then all of those students or employees have access to the benefits of WFPG, which are networking events, networking programs, mentorship programs. All of our programs and events are only open to members. So those are big draws. And then at WFPG, in my experience there, was also that it was a small, efficient working office. So on the right in the photo, you can see me and 3 of my fellow colleagues at an event that I will talk about later. So my role at the organization was a programs intern. It was a collaborative and small office environment with only 2 full-time staff. The executive director Alexa Chipivsky, and the program associate Lindsay Sharman, and then 6 interns. There was 3 program interns pictured down below on the left, and then 2 communications interns and 1 operations intern. So as program interns, we developed, researched, and executed programs for members and partners. So one example of a program that I developed that actually is just coming to fruition now is a event hosted in partnership with SEPA, which is the Center for European, oh, hold on, I'm going to forget what it's called. I apologize. The Center for European Policy Analysis. And so some of their members had attended our events before and reached out and said that, hey, we would like to host an event in collaboration with you. And in Paris, I took a lot of classes about European Union politics. And then also democracy in the EU. And so this seemed right up my alley. So I volunteered to start researching the organization. And in doing that, I also found a whole short list of speakers who would be interesting to have on this panel. And the panel actually will take place in the next week or so. That's very exciting to see that happen. And then execute programs, those are programs that were already in the developmental stages before. WFPG has intern cohorts in the winter, summer, and spring, so it's kind of just a continuous working cycle. And then finally, as a programs intern, along with the other interns, of course, we staffed all of the events. There was about 2 in-person, on average, 2 in-person events per month and 2 virtual events. Problem solving, interacting with members. I picked up a lot of phone calls, talked with a lot of people who just randomly walked into the office, but also welcomed people at events and had a chance to learn how to network myself. So this was one of my favorite events to work. This was the Celebration of Women Diplomats. It was hosted at the residence of the Ambassador of Mexico, who you can see in the top right corner. And it was a celebration of all the female ambassador and deputy ambassadors in DC. So pictured on the left-hand side is all of those diplomats who were able to honor. This is only about 1/3 of all the female diplomats in DC, so just picture that number tripled. And the impact is really cool to see. We had a running spreadsheet of whether every ambassador and deputy in DC were male or female, and out of all the countries, the percentage, is growing, and that's great to see as well. And then down on the bottom right is me and the Deputy Ambassador of France, which was an insane experience because I got to speak to her in French, and she went to the same political science institution I went to in Paris. And so that was a really nerve-wracking and exciting experience. I have 2 kind of stories to share from this event experience. The first was not to keep talking about my study abroad. But a lot of my friends in Paris were European exchange students themselves. And so when it came time to, figure out how to pronounce all the diplomats' names, sometimes I couldn't get in contact with the embassy offices. And so for example, I called my Swedish friend and I was like, hey, Kevin, how do I say this Icelandic name? And he gave me a voice recording. And so I did that 5 or 6 times. And that was just a really cool intersection of my Smith study abroad experience and this internship. And then also the Mexican ambassador, his wife does not speak great English, and I unfortunately do not speak Spanish. But she went to a French medium school growing up, so we got to converse in French, which was really exciting. Yes. So how did I find WFPG? As many students probably know, it just takes a lot of continuous searching for internships. I started applying to internships in October. Network, NGOs, think tanks, all of the things you can imagine that I'm sure you're probably looking at as well. But I came across WFPG probably in February on LinkedIn just by chance, but their application portal had filled up in 48 hours. So unfortunately, I could not apply, but I was talking to my dad about it the day after, and apparently he knew someone who knew the executive director. So I was able to establish an email chain and set up a Zoom call. It was basically just like, I really enjoy your organization. I've loved what I've read about it so far. If you have any volunteer opportunities, I'll be in the DC area. Please feel free. And I thought that was that. And then a week later, I got an email saying I had been advanced to the final stage of the internship process, application process, and I ended up getting it. So, I learned that networking actually works, which I was not convinced it did beforehand. But yes. Oh, just these pictures. The bottom left is from the French embassy. The top is from an event that we hosted on Chinese relations. And the bottom right is the office that we worked in. Yeah. So, my reflections about the internship. The kind of key things I want to highlight are networking skills. As I said, networking definitely does work, but you just have to keep on trying, which I think is the hardest part. I also gained office experience. This was my first official DC internship, and so it was a great place to get started. I also very minimal presence, but was able to start establishing a presence in DC. I talked to a lot of people ranging from entry-level positions all the way to high up and was able to connect with them on LinkedIn. So hopefully that'll start my flow. It's also helped me to figure out what to look for in an internship. I'm not going to be picky with fellowships or internships. You can't really afford to at this point in time. But just knowing what keywords I'm looking for in position descriptions, if I make it to internship stages, knowing which questions to ask and knowing what I enjoy and how I can best collaborate with a team. So my next steps are I'm going back to DC, which is where my family lives, applying to fellowships, internships, etc. And then I was also able to figure out through WFPG and all the networking events that we hosted that I am going to apply to law school. That was really a consequence of being able to talk to a lot of incredible people in the field and figure out where their paths took them and learning that law school will help me develop the analytical skills that I think will be useful in a career in international relations. And yes, that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Well done. Next, we will hear from Riddha.
All right, hopefully you all can see my screen. Okay, so, oops. Okay, there we go. Hi everyone, my name is Riddha. I am a senior at Smith and I am studying geoscience, like geobiology, and I'm also a government major. And this past summer, I interned at First People, First Steward, which is a subset program, which I'll explain a little bit later, with the Department of Cultural Resources, in the state of Massachusetts. So generally, what is the program? First People, First Steward essentially supports tribal governments and indigenous community stakeholders through building reciprocal relationships that provide access and opportunities for indigenous people who want to connect with land, water, and the natural world and unite in the co-stewardship of indigenous homelands. And essentially the way I can break down for y'all the program is that essentially um, the big office is the Massachusetts Office for Energy and Environmental Affairs. And then under that is the Department of Cultural Resources. And then this program is under the Department of Cultural Resources, which is the First People, First Steward program. And it's like a brand new department program. So yeah. And then what was this program for me? So this internship was actually originally hybrid. I was supposed to go into Boston and work from home part-time. But then after having my interview, I was actually also studying abroad, not that far by from Paris. I was in Geneva. So I had my interview in Geneva. And so after having a discussion and interview with my supervisor, they thought it would be better for me to be based in New York, as I am originally from New York. Um, because they wanted to compare ideas and get ideas essentially from the New York state parks in comparison to the Massachusetts state parks and improve the ones that already facilitate programs with like Indigenous tribes and their access to parks. So some of the tasks that I completed over the summer include like database building. So I created a library database to take inventory of the current number of Department of Cultural Resources park passes available to the public. in order to provide accessibility to Indigenous homelands under the stewardship to Indigenous people and use this system as a model for like future expansion of park passes to tribes. I was able to conduct research into other state park models for collaboration with tribal governments and Indigenous populations. And then I visited some parks within New York. To showcase the physical comparisons, as they already have a lot of data with the parks in Massachusetts. My boss also was doing a lot of site visits, so we would have active calls and like compare the two. Um, and then a creation of events databases to track Indigenous related events that were applying for like special use permits to begin to build standards and procedures for the First People, First Stewards program of Indigenous related events. And so these are like some of the pictures, just like two parks essentially that I visited over the summer. Um, just to like showcase any sort of indigenous cultural relevancy. So for example, like I took pictures of like art or like any sort of like regalia or anything of that sort. So one of them is Big Rock, which is a glacial erratic, which has ties to indigenous lore from Rockefeller State Park, and then within that same park, art by an indigenous artist or museum curator. So that was really cool. And then this was in Riverside State Park in New York City. So just Mother Tree, which is also tied to indigenous lore, is just also like I took other pictures to compare parks that they had in Massachusetts versus New York. So yeah, and then why is this work important? Essentially, it builds reciprocal relationships between the Department of Cultural Resources and tribal governments, as that's a gap that they noticed beforehand before starting this department or this program rather. Um, Engaging Indigenous community stakeholders in partnership and collaboration, strengthening the Department of Cultural Resources mission by incorporating culturally responsive stewardship, and that's something that they wanted to emphasize, and that was really important to them, and providing Indigenous perspectives and knowledge as an additional stewardship lens. Sorry. And then creating access and opportunities for Indigenous people to connect with land, water, and the natural world, and then creating and informing about accessibility, because accessibility was one of the main priorities of this initial project, one of the projects of park services for Indigenous people in the state of Massachusetts. So one of the examples was the library card access, and then the other example was park services. And then how I got here. So, as I mentioned before, I'm a government major, and I studied abroad in Geneva. I did specifically the Track A program, and I was very lucky, and I got to intern for International Organization for Migration, which is one of the UN agencies. And I think that sort of gave me some sort of like international perspective. Um, and I definitely wanted over the summer to kind of continue larger government perspectives and gain engagement with uh, governments. And so I really wanted to do so, but I wanted to have like a state government sort of perspective. And so that meant more grassroots work. And so, yeah, and then community engagement. So I was a CSO representative, which is like a community service organization representative, which is one of the House Council positions at Smith. Um, and so through that, I did a lot of like community service work. And then the next step for that was a community service internal affairs coordinator, which is the job that manages all the community service organization representatives. And then I was also involved in the advocacy for refugee and immigrant services for empowerment, which is a long name, but essentially Arise. I was involved in that organization as well, and I gained some sort of exposure with refugees and again, sort of that grassroots level engagement. And then lastly, Indigenous engagement. So I had an internship 2 J terms ago which is January terms, with California Families Tribal Coalition, which focused on legal aspects for Indigenous people. So some things that surprised me about this internship was discovering how uneven Indigenous-focused programs were across parks and libraries. So some libraries and some parks had very strong initiatives, and others had almost none. A second thing was how time-consuming building the actual database was, because I had to call every single library in the state of Massachusetts, and I didn't realize how time-consuming that could be. Very rewarding in the end, for sure, but definitely time-consuming. Especially like cleaning and standardizing and organizing inconsistent information definitely took a lot of time. And then because the program was brand new, I was one of the only interns, which meant supporting some of the share foundational work as my supervisor built the initiative from scratch. And I learned or took away from this programization some field skills, which were like on-site observation, connecting policy to real-world conditions, equity and cultural competency, so applying an equity lens, understanding Indigenous stewardship perspectives, professional skills, so collaboration and time management, and understanding the workings of different government levels, as I explained before. And that's it. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you. Okay, last but not least, Nicole, you're up.
All right. So, hello everyone. My name is Nicole Simorangkir. I'm a senior studying here at Smith, and today I'm going to be giving a little bit of a, candid reflection of my experience interning at the Permanent Mission of Indonesia to the United Nations in New York City. Before I get into this, I didn't make a dedicated slide just because I wouldn't know how to phrase it, but I did want to tell you guys a little bit about how I ended up with this internship. Like what Shalini said, networking works. But basically, I have a great aunt, twice removed, who I met my freshman year of college. She's based in New York City. She's also Indonesian like me, but I had never met her before that. The reason why I met her was because at the time I was going to Sarah Lawrence, and my mom wanted to make sure that I had a relative nearby. But I found out last year that in the 70s, when she first came to New York City, she had actually worked at the mission as a secretary for the Economic and Social Division. And essentially, last January, she was kikiing with my dad, and she had basically said, "Hey, Nicole loves the city. She's always texting me about it. Why doesn't she spend the summer here?" And my dad told her, "Well, it's kind of hard, what is she gonna do? Internships don't come by easy." And she basically, like what Shawnee explained, found an old friend who worked at the front desk, who had a friend, who had a friend, who had a friend, and then got his number. And so she forwarded me the number. She's like 70 years old, so she has that like mentality where it's like, come on, just do it. You'll never know what happens. So I texted him, and then he was like, sounds great. I am the completely wrong person though. So he sent me another number, and he was a secretary for the Economic and Social Division, and he connected me with someone who was in the actual admin for the permanent mission. And he said, sure, send me your documents, let me see your resume, send me a cover letter, some writing samples. And then he ghosted me for a month and a half. I kept sending text messages. Mind you, these are Indonesian people, so we're texting. We're not even emailing. So I felt really strange to be texting somebody who would eventually become my boss. But eventually he got back to me in April, and he set up a Zoom call, and then that's how I got my internship. And a little bit more about that later, about how strange that was. But a little bit about me. I am a government major, and my academic interests lie in comparative politics and IR. And because I am Indonesian American, I do as much as I can at Smith or previously at my previous college to write about Indonesia and its politics and its history. So landing this internship was incredible. Not, I didn't know what I was going to be doing exactly, but I knew that it was going to be exciting being able to work with people who had their own niches in Indonesian politics and being able to learn from them. With that being said, the way that they structured this internship was really interesting because they have three divisions within the mission, and you can see there political, economic and social, and legal affairs. And those three, each of them align with a committee in the UN. And so for each month that I was there, June, July, and August, um, I was with a different division. And so the people that I was working for changed every month, which I feel like was really something it was a very interesting experience, being able to talk to a lot of people. Um, but I also thought that it made a lot of sense considering that my studies have changed so much since I started as a freshman. Um, but going into this internship, my personal goal was really to understand what IGO diplomacy work looked like. I'm sure everybody here who does anything government, when we talk about the UN, a lot of it is theoretical. When we talk about international relations and rules and what is right, what is wrong, a lot of that is theory. And so being able to represent the Indonesian delegation and go to the UN and do all these things. I was really looking forward to understanding how all of these things worked. So, my responsibilities, these are the official things that I had to do. My workday began at 9 and ended at 5, though depending on which division I was in, sometimes I could leave later, or sometimes I had to leave later, which meant I had longer work day. But a lot of the times I could come in at maybe 9:15, 9:30, and then leave a little bit early because they were really nice to me. But early in the morning, I'd have to sort of catch up on anything that had happened since I'd gone to sleep. Because the UN and also the Permanent Mission of Indonesia, we were responding to things that were happening currently. And so what I think of right now as like some of the big things that I had to keep up on would be the things that were happening between Iran and Israel, everything that was going on in Palestine. I had to attend a lot of meetings on Russia and Ukraine, and so I also had to do, a deep dive into the history there, just to make sure that I wasn't advising my bosses on things that were completely incorrect. And so that's how my morning started, just making sure that I was caught up on everything so that if someone wanted to talk to me about it, I already knew what they were talking about. And also so that if my bosses were missing something, I had that info down. And around 10, I would switch over to the UN Security Council live stream. If I was busy, I'd stay in the office and watch a live stream. If I had a little bit of time, I'd be able to go to headquarters and watch it in person and take minutes. But typically, I'd be double tasking. I'd be taking minutes, just making sure that, all of the countries and delegations, anything that they had to say, I had it down so that we could sort of record any shifts in perspectives or rhetoric. Very, very tedious work. Um, and sometimes, like what I said, the double tasking, it would overlap with me writing memos on what had been happening in the morning. So, for example, if when everything was happening with Iran and Israel, I'd catch up on the news in the morning, and then I would watch the UN Security Council meeting on what was happening. And at the same time, I'd be writing a memo for one of my bosses because I had one of my bosses who was a secretary under the political division. He wanted to make sure that I sent something in at 12 p.m. and one at 5, just to keep him like up to date. So that's what my mornings look like. And then sometimes in the afternoon, it was either a live stream and I'd write something or I'd go to a meeting in person. So what this actually felt like, it was a lot because, you know, it's interesting because it definitely felt like there was a routine, but depending on the day, depending on what was happening in the world, I really didn't know what was going to happen. And so, yes, there was the policy research at my desk, and sometimes it was so fulfilling, but other times it was also so, what's the word? It was very tedious. And there wasn't a lot of guidance, which for me made me nervous because sometimes I would be asked to, research something that had to do with, for example, there was this geospatial conference. I had no idea what this was about. I was really confused, and they asked me to do a write-up. And then they said, okay, why don't you go through that again? Make sure that there aren't any typos because we're going to send this to Jakarta. I asked, what do you mean by that? And they were going to send it as an official report to the central government. So there were a lot of things like that where I just wouldn't know what was happening, but it was very exciting. And some of the things that I really enjoyed on these typical days were being asked to go to meetings at HQ with my boss, because sometimes in the beginning she was a little bit worried to send me on my own, and she also just wanted to be there with me so that I could ask her any questions. And so I really enjoyed that. But other than that, a typical day, a lot of sitting down, a lot of research, a lot of double tasking, a lot of waiting. But it was really exciting when I sort of graduated into attending last minute meetings alone because I felt very official. Now comes the challenges. Like I said, this is a very candid reflection of my internship. I am Indonesian American. However, my formal Bahasa Indonesian skills are a little bit lacking. And so sometimes it was a little bit difficult, especially being an intern. Essentially, typically they have around 5 to 7 interns, but for some reason this year I was the only one. I'm not sure why. And so I didn't have a lot of people to talk to about my reports. And so when it came to writing, especially those reports that were going to be sent back to Jakarta, I got really nervous because it's very different. It's a whole different ball game. It's like completely different words. Whew, it was a big challenge. And when it came to talking to people who outranked me by a lot, not just secretaries, but also counselors and also ambassadors and the military attaches, that became a little bit nerve-wracking, but I got through it and they were very understanding. Um, Repetitive routines also became a little bit tough just because I was a little bit alone. But I do want to talk about this in the sense that there were a lot of big things happening last summer, and it's very challenging things to be, writing about, and to also just be witnessing, and also, be talking about with my bosses, and to sort of have a repetitive routine and know that things are going to only be changing on a very small scale. I was talking about this with Heather, where on a local scale, things move a lot faster. And then you go up to the state level and then federal level. And then now we're at this international level where we have all of these actors, all of these countries trying to negotiate. And it's tough. And with the things that were happening last summer, and honestly, the things that are happening now, it got really difficult. I'm very grateful that I had bosses who sat down with me and talked to me about their opinions on the organization. But it was tough. And so with that came, challenges being UN bureaucracy and pace and uncertainty. But my highlights are honestly quite amazing. I had a really great time. July was an amazing month. The UN High Level Political Forum Week happened, which is a whole week dedicated to the SDGs. I was sent on to a lot of big girl meetings, and I attended a lot of meetings on human rights and youth participation. And I actually met a guy who works at Verite downtown in Northampton, which was really interesting. And I was meeting a lot of people who were very passionate about the same things that I was, but found alternatives to, something different than an IGL, which was very interesting and refreshing. And it breathed some life back into my internship and my summer. And that was the week that I wrote, I think, 14 official reports to the central government, which was really exciting. Other than that, throughout the whole summer, I went to a bunch of urgent Security Council meetings in person, and it was really exciting seeing everyone turn red and angry and, just hashing it out. It was really exciting, and honestly, just like writing minutes sometimes it got to a point where my minutes, like I started making like character descriptions, and it was really exciting. And below that says ARIA formula meetings, and I felt it was really exciting because those are sort of the unofficial Security Council meetings that they can't really make official. And those were also really exciting. If you Google like old live streams, you might see my face. It's awesome. But over here, you can see me with the governor of Jakarta. This is me with the ambassador, the permanent ambassador of Indonesia to the United Nations. And this is me seated at ECOSOC, which is the Economic and Social something division. It's a very long, I don't know, it's really long. My takeaways I feel like are very different from other people's takeaways. I just feel like I learned a lot about myself and also like how I, prefaced my presentation. I was going into it knowing a lot of theoretical, having all of these ideas and opinions about the United Nations, very strong opinions. And so my takeaways have a lot to do with what I want to pursue in the future. And I'm a senior. And so diplomacy is very interesting and it's very important, but it's not for everyone. And I realize that. And after talking with a lot of my bosses, I thought that a lot of them, this was their, their dream and they wanted to do this, but a lot of them have their own niches within politics and Indonesian history and all these things. And so my point is to say that it's definitely an experience and I'm so grateful for it. But I think it was Riddha who was talking about it, where I do want to sort of experience something on a more local level and to be meeting the people that I'm talking about and advocating for, et cetera, et cetera. Collaboration and conversation is very important to me. I realized that after my internship, I cannot be the only intern. I need to have community. I need to always be building on other people's conversations and have people talk to me and stuff like that. And lastly, staying flexible and pacing each day is key. I know these are very different takeaways than my colleagues just but that was a big one that I learned about myself. So thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, so if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have time for a few questions, and maybe I'll just throw one out there that we've kind of already discussed just to start us off, which several of you have talked about. You were at different levels of government, both in this internship experience and in others, local, state, federal, international. What about your experiences shaped your understanding of those different levels of government? Do you have any advice for people who are still trying to figure that out? And did it impact maybe what you're doing in the future?
I can start.
Great.
So, yeah, I think there is like a drastic difference. Like I said, I interned for International Organization for Migration in the spring, and then I shifted gears to a more like state government, and I realized how much or to what degree things are less or more bureaucratic. So I think as you go up, it's more bureaucratic. There are very like strong systems put in place, at least in my personal experience. And then within like a state government or within like a semi-local slash state government position or internship, it's definitely more it's it's something where you kind of take it as you go, or things are always evolving, things are always changing. So that's like something that's a drastic difference. Whereas like international governments or at least organizations might have like a project that might be kind of like more so set in stone, and that's the procedure that they follow, and it's much more strict. Um, and yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Did anyone else want to jump in? If not, I have another question I can ask.
My advice would just be if you have the time and you are interested and don't necessarily know what level or what sphere of government you want to go into, try it all. A lot of the people that I talked to that had a lot of success before landing tried working on the Hill. They tried working in corporations. They tried, and like, so if you don't know what you want to do, and that's part of the reason I'm just aiming to do fellowships and internships, try it all, or try as much as you can and then decide.
Okay, I have another question. How does someone break into one of these fields, like international affairs or government or policy? Some of you talked about networking, but do you have any advice for students currently looking for internships or maybe future smithies? We're thinking ahead.
I can answer this one. So actually, I found my internship on Handshake before going to the career fair, and I hadn't really thought about it. It was just kind of something that I saw and just kind of forgot about later. But then when scrolling through and looking at the employers that would be at the career fair, I kind of, went back to the posting, did some of my research on the Massachusetts trial court, the job description, what they were looking for. And then from there, I kind of made like a mental note to myself going into the career fair that that was one of the top places that I wanted to talk to and just kind of get more information on. And from there, through having a conversation with the recruiter, finding out that we had something in common. I'm from the area, I'm from Amherst, and they were as well, and we had a mutual connection. So from there, just kind of not only making those connections on the spot, but also doing your research beforehand and going in prepared. Just yeah, going to career fairs and then also just looking on Handshake. It's a really great resource to find internships. That's actually how I found my current internship, which is working with a nonprofit. So definitely Handshake and career fairs.
Awesome.
I
Anyone
can
else?
definitely agree with that. I also found mine on Handshake actually. I just kind of clicked apply and it went from there. But I would say definitely take advantage of Smith's resources. Definitely talk to your professors because they have a lot of information. Um, yeah, like I said, like Geneva, I think really was really honestly a pivotal moment because it placed me in like an international organization. And I think honestly from there, I was really able to like break into other types of government or even get responses back because that's extremely hard. And so that's like one of the main things I would say, and like any other opportunities that your advisors or professors might have any research opportunities as well. And definitely don't be afraid to like go start with like grassroots level work because I think that definitely helps you build the skills that you might need for like a state or local or federal or international internship for sure.
Thank you. Okay, we do have a question in the chat from Liliana. Did you all use your Praxis funding for these internships or were they paid? And did the Praxis funding help you make these possible?
I personally, my job had a independent contractor stipend, which meant I was getting paid, $3 an hour technically. But I was an unpaid internship, so they could do that. So I applied for Praxis on top of that, and that was very helpful. Um, just like commuting, I lived with my parents in Virginia, which was helpful on the rent side. But just like commuting into DC was really expensive, so Praxis helped with that. Food, the late nights when I couldn't take the metro anymore and needed to Uber home. Like all of those things just made it a lot easier. And it also made coming back on campus easier because I wasn't very stressed about the money.
I also go ahead if you want to go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I also applied for Praxis funding and I was lucky enough to stay at a friend's apartment for the summer because she had already moved back to Jakarta and she just needed someone to finish her lease and so I stayed there for free. Um and but yeah, it was an unpaid internship and it was a little bit scary. I'm very lucky to have my great aunt, give me food on weekends and stuff like that.
Mine was also, I also used Praxis. Since the internship was like initially hybrid and I did make a trip up a couple of times to Boston through Amtrak, that was a bit pricey. So Praxis definitely helped. And it was one of my last times to use Praxis as I'm graduating in May. So yeah.
Okay, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and conclude the 2026 Smith and the World panel on government law policy and international affairs. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. Your presentations were brilliant. And thank you to our audience for your attention and your questions. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we have two more upcoming panels that you can register for that are happening next week. And I believe the link for that is at the very top of our chat. So I hope everyone has a good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.